Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game SO Terrating series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and because all of the clones are releasing, new people are getting into MiSTer, I figured I would talk about the best new things to buy for your MiSTer FPGA setup. Because let's be honest here, we're all gamers, and what that means is when you save money on one thing, you're going to pipe all that savings plus extra into some accessories or other things for your brand new shiny console. Or maybe you've been a MiSTer user for years and you just want to pick up something new. These are the things that I use in my setup and when I'm making videos. If you're far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, I have a Patreon link down below as well. And speaking of links, all of the things in this video will be linked in the description below when applicable. But the first thing when you get MiSTer FPGA is you realize there is an absolute infinite amount of controllers you can plug into this thing. Whether they're modern with USB or retro with adapters or SNAC. This is going to be your first stop when you get MiSTer FPGA. Sure, you can use something like an Xbox Series X, a PlayStation 4 or 5, or a Nintendo Switch Pro controller as kind of the basis of your setup. Once you get into some of the more specialized cores, you're definitely going to want to start looking at different controller options that will be good for each core. So I'm going to start with the USB and then move over to the user I/O or SNAC port later on in the video. And do remember that blue user I/O port at the top of your MiSTer FPGA, that is not USB, it's just a USB-A port. So you can definitely just grab whatever modern controller you want to use with USB and plug it directly into the side. But it really gets more exciting when you get over to stuff like MiSTer Addons Reflex Adapt. This will allow you to basically take any retro controller, adapt it over to a USB protocol, and plug it into your MiSTer FPGA with latency so minimal the human mind would never notice it. This is basically almost what I use every single capture when I'm playing different cores, so I can use the original controller and get as good a footage and gameplay experience as possible. It is a tiny device, fits in the palm of your hand, and can sit right next to your MiSTer FPGA, bringing those signals over. And MiSTer Addons has so many different adapters. They use an HDMI port as well as a cable, but it's not HDMI protocol obviously. And at the other end of all of the adapters, you're going to have the female mating product for the controller you want to use. Right here I'm showing GameCube because I really do like using that on certain cores. It just has a really nice comfortable hand feel for me. So if you want to use any of your retro controllers that are not USB, MiSTer Addons Reflex Adapt has basically a lead for almost every single thing you could possibly imagine. So the gigantic bin of retro controllers I know you probably have hanging out in your house, because trust me, I have more than 2 of them. It's getting to be a problem at this point in time. They can all be used on MiSTer FPGA. All you do is plug in one USB cable from MiSTer over to the Reflex Adapt, and then you use the controller adapter into whatever controller you would like to use, and then it is just going to function and map like you're using a USB controller. And it allows you to do stuff like use the original Neo Geo AES stick. Mine is modded with new parts, but the exact same guts on the inside minus the buttons and stick, and this just lets you get the original console feel for those games, because I absolutely love Neo Geo AES, and I basically always play with a mixture of the original controller modified as well as some of my own custom home builds. But having an arcade stick, especially on the arcade side of things, I think is absolutely one of the best investments in money you can spend on MiSTer FPGA, and I'll show you what I use pretty much standard in just a few moments. But on top of MiSTer Addons, we also have SNAC and SNACs. This is a serial adapter that allows you to use the original controllers into the user port with basically zero latency, because it is a serial connection, not a USB one. So SNAC and SNACs is a secondary option, but I do like MiSTer Addons Reflex Adapt the best just for the ease of use and the fact that it also works on Windows, so it is a nice dual purpose device. And there's so many different connectors for this thing. I'm pretty sure at this point in time MiSTer Addons has one for every single controller you would want to use, and probably a couple of controllers absolutely no one would ever be interested in using whatsoever. So if you're thinking about using your old controllers, you can do either of these options. And additionally, there's a bunch of other makers on the market that are doing a very similar thing depending on what control scheme you want. What you're seeing right now is a 4-player wired or wireless Neo Geo controller adapter. It's going to allow you to actually use your controllers wirelessly or plug them in, and you can get a 4-player experience out of it. That's absolutely epic, and I will leave a link to Boot Sector's device down below. And there's also independent SNAC adapters for stuff like Nintendo 64, allowing you to plug 4 different controllers into the SNAC adapter port or the user port on the I/O board, so you can get those 4-player games of Mario Kart and every other thing like GoldenEye on Nintendo 64. And speaking of Nintendo 64, if you do want to play around with that core, and I cannot recommend that enough, it is absolutely spectacular. This is the type of thing that you want to get a controller that actually works with the button layout for. So you can use Mr. Addons Reflex Adapt for USB, you can use any other diverse SNAC adapters for Nintendo 64, but a word of advice, I see too many people do this, do not plug your SNAC adapter directly into the user I/O port. All it's going to do is cause torque if you move it up and down. Use an extender cable, a short one but one at that. That way if it does move or pull, you're not stressing that port out, because I hear so many people have damaged that port doing exactly that. Additionally, there are aftermarket controllers on the market for Nintendo 64. I like the Retro Fighters Brawler 64 the best if I'm not going to use my original controllers, but again, based upon the very specialized button layout and configuration for Nintendo 64, having a controller that has that is absolutely golden. And I use the Neo Geo Arcade Stick Pro as a base. I have modified this inside with my own parts that I purchased and modded in to get a better feel. But this is USB, it pairs incredibly well over USB with Mr. FPGA, and it has a really nice feel in the hand. Any USB arcade stick will work, but this one's usually on sale and it's infinitely modifiable, so this is the one I recommend. Now, from controllers, let's talk about analog video, because you guys are definitely going to want to be using this if you have a CRT around. Mr. FPGA is an absolute powerhouse when it comes to outputting an RGB signal, a component, a composite signal, things such as that. You pretty much have the ultimate ability to do whatever you would like with the video signal. But there's definitely cables out there that are better or worse quality because they are analog. So I will leave in the link below links to the cables I use for all of my videos and all of my captures. This is what I trust. Obviously, if you have the ability, RGB is going to be the best analog signal you can get out of Mr. FPGA outside of going 31 kHz VGA, which you can do as well. And it's one of those things, if you have a PVM or if you're in Europe and you have SCART, something like RGB is going to be the best for you. So I'll also leave a link to a SCART cable below, even though it isn't something that I generally use for my setup. But Mr. FPGA on a PVM or a CRT is just such a sight to behold, and while it looks incredible on a modern 1080p or 4K display as well, CRT is always where my heart lies, and I'm sure a lot of you have at least one CRT television hanging around, and if you don't, I'll get into that in just a moment. But that is the RGB BNC cable I recommend. And again, I'll leave a link below, because don't buy the cheapest cable you can find, don't buy the most expensive cable you can find, buy the one that gets recommended to you. And they are not affiliate links, I'm not trying to make a ton of money for this whatsoever. And you're going to be able to get RGB video out of these BNC connectors, and you will see that there's going to be two different sync signals on as well. If you want to do something like HV sync, you have both of them. If you're just doing 15 kHz, you're just going to use the standard sync cable, which will be the gray one on that. And don't forget, you can get audio out either via analog or optical on pretty much every I/O board. Additionally, at least in my capture setup, you can also use component video, and I will leave a link in the description to the component cable I like as well. It's never let me down and always gets a good analog signal, and you'll be 100% good to go for it. Let's talk about MIDI, especially the MT32 Pi Hat. The Sharp X68000 core is my favorite for MIDI, but the DOS AO486 core is going to allow it as well. Getting MIDI out of Mr. FPGA is super easy, and an MT32 Pi Hat with the Pi is definitely a cheap item that's going to give you a ton of longevity as far as the fun MIDI music you can hear. My favorite example definitely has to be Akumajo Dracula on the Sharp X68000 work in progress core. Listen to just how good this sounds and think, isn't this something you wanted to hear, mister? just some of the best MIDI music on the platform, and if you're not planning on playing the Sharp X68000 core or the DOS AO46 core, maybe not for you, but if you are, it is an awesome device to have. Now let's talk about CRT televisions in general. If you do not have one right now and you're thinking that you might be interested in one, I can't recommend enough just how nice it is to have a CRT TV paired with your MiSTer. You do not need to go out and buy a PVM. Sure, I've got 3 of them sitting here, but it's one of those things. You can find good CRT televisions for basically free in any major market. Do not believe when people tell you that CRT televisions have to cost hundreds upon hundreds of dollars. If I look on Facebook Marketplace in Chicago, I can find people literally giving them away if you're just willing to actually pick it up and move it, because these things are expensive to get rid of and they're very heavy as well. So just look around Facebook Marketplace. This isn't something I can link to because it's not a product anybody sells, but trust me, this is the last time I've looked, and you could find decent Sony CRT televisions with composite or S-video inputs for absolutely free. I can get these all day long, and if you want something for $45 to $100 that's going to have something like composite converted video in it, you're going to be able to find that so long as you live in a decent size area. Even the small areas should be good. Or Toshiba 20-inch flat panel TV for $230, maybe a little on the high side, but it's going to have all of the components you want as far as the inputs in the back are concerned. So trust me, if you have the space for a CRT television and you've been thinking about picking one up, MiSTer FPGA is the perfect excuse to do so, and you can find them for damn near free, if not $50 all day long, and trust me, I'd check. Now the last thing I'm going to recommend, and if you don't like light gun games, you don't have to worry about it, is getting some sort of way to play light gun games for your MiSTer FPGA. My default when I'm playing something like this on my LCD television is to use Gun for IR. It has a 4 IR sensor set, the software works perfectly in conjunction with MiSTer, and it's basically almost a zero-sum setup once you get it set up on your PC. And I do have a video explaining how to use Gun for IR for MiSTer, so check the playlist if you need help with that. But there's 3 different light guns that will work with MiSTer FPGA on top of something like Gun for IR, and I'm going to go over those as well. And I know that the Sinden light gun does work, I just don't have one right now, so I can't really specify that. Something like the original GunCon from Namco that works with the original Point Blank 1, 2, 3 and Time Crisis is probably the best light gun ever made as far as CRT televisions are concerned. Just remember that this does tap into the composite sync signal, and that's how it does track where you're actually aiming on the screen in real time. So depending on what board you're using, you may need to have something like this board right here that's going to allow you to actually get that composite sync out. I will leave links in the description for all of this as well. There's different boards for different devices as far as the type of signal you're actually trying to pass through. Because if you want composite or S-video, you use one board. If you want to tap into the RGB signal and get that signal out, MiSTer Addons has boards like this, which are going to allow you basically just to daisy chain with a VGA cable your RGB signal and tap 1 and 2 player sync so that your GunCons will work. And these are going to work with both the GunCon 1 as well as the GunCon 2, even though they do have different connection types as far as how the controls go into MiSTer FPGA, and the actual composite sync is going to be basically the same across the board for both of those. So if you love those light gun games and you don't have a CRT television and you don't want to play original hardware, MiSTer FPGA is an amazing choice. And if you want to use the GunCon 2, that actually might be the GunCon I recommend for CRT television because it has more buttons on the side, which is going to give you a little bit more control over the cores when you're actually trying to navigate around them. But this will work with the exact same adapter boards I just showed you for the GunCon 1. And if you also have a GunCon 3, you don't need to worry about adapter boards whatsoever. This was made by Namco for PlayStation 3, and it works on an LCD television. And any light gun that'll work on LCD, whether it's the GunCon 3 or the Gun for IR, will also work in the cores that use CRT televisions. PlayStation games like Point Blank or Time Crisis can be used with GunCon 3 and Gun for IR on LCD just as easy as they can be used with GunCon 1 and GunCon 2 on a CRT television. So the great thing is we have an absolutely infinite amount of options when it comes to light gun games, and since it's really one of my favorite genres of all time and it works so well with MiSTer FPGA, I wanted to dedicate some time in this video to talk about just how you can enjoy these things, because if you are new to MiSTer, you need to remember there's so many different things you can do with MiSTer FPGA. You just might need to grab a few accessories to make sure you can do it. But that is my guide for Mr. FPGA accessories for 2024. Whether you are a new user, whether you've just gotten in maybe 6 months or a year ago, there's so many different things you can do adapter-wise, device-wise, television-wise to make your Mr. FPGA even that much better. And because the baseline performance of Mr. FPGA is a 20 out of 10, just think how much better you can make it. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. I'm happy to help. Short of that, we are done. Go buy some accessories. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.